I've always been a simple girl. I never asked for much from life, just peace, purpose, and the love of my family. In my late 20s now, I still remember the scent of fresh linen and handmade candles that filled the air whenever I stepped into my mother's little shop. It wasn't some big fancy place, just a cozy corner store tucked between two larger buildings on Maple Street. But to us it was everything. My mother poured her soul into that shop. She named it Grace and Light, saying it was how she wanted people to feel when they walked in. She sold handmade crafts, little trinkets, and beautifully stitched items. Some made by her, some by local women she supported. That store wasn't just a business. It was her heart. And I was lucky enough to grow up inside it, learning from her, watching her greet every customer like an old friend. We weren't rich, not even close. But somehow her warmth made life feel full. I would sit behind the counter, scribbling in my notebooks while she worked. She always made time to smile at me, brush the hair from my eyes, and say, "This shop will be yours someday, sweetheart. But only if you promise to treat it like a living thing." I didn't fully understand her words then, but now they echo in my heart like a song I never want to forget. She passed away 2 years ago. Still feels like yesterday. One day she was laughing, sewing a new design she wanted to hang on the door, and the next she was just gone. The shop felt empty after that. No matter how many candles I lit or how many new pieces I arranged, it wasn't the same without her humming in the background. But I tried. I really did. I couldn't let go of it. That place was the only part of her I had left. Every shelf, every drawer, even the chipped paint on the counter reminded me of her hands. Always busy, always gentle. It didn't matter that business was slow or that I barely made enough to cover the rent. I stayed because in that shop I could still feel her presence. I could still feel loved. After Mom passed, things got harder than I ever imagined. Emotionally, I was already hanging by a thread, but financially, it was like drowning slowly. The shop had loyal customers, yes, but not enough. Some stopped coming after Mom was gone. Maybe they didn't feel the same warmth anymore. Maybe they thought I couldn't run it the way she did. They weren't wrong, I was trying, but I was no magician. I barely had money for new stock, and some months I'd sit by the counter calculating how much I could delay the rent without being evicted. So I held on. I couldn't let her dream fade just because I was struggling. I started making my own crafts at night to sell, watching videos, learning from scratch. I cleaned every corner, lit the same candles she used to, played her favorite soft radio station in the background, hoping people would feel her energy again. That's when Aunt Rukiah came around. She wasn't Mom's real sister, but more like a cousin who grew up close to her. I remembered her from childhood visits, loud laughter, red lipstick, and a strange perfume that always gave me a headache. She showed up one afternoon, all smiles and sympathy, holding a basket of fruit and calling me baby. She said she was sorry for not being around when Mom died, that she had been in another city but had come as soon as she heard I was struggling. I wanted to believe her. I really did. She started visiting the shop often, helping around, giving advice, telling me I needed to be more modern, bring in bigger stock, take the business online. She knew people, she said. She had business experience. I felt grateful. She talked fast and convinced me even faster. One day she brought papers. Just formalities, she said. Things to help register the shop under a business name so it would be easier to get loans, government grants, help from the system. "I'll be your partner on paper," she smiled. "But everything is yours, sweetheart. Just trust me." And I did. I signed without reading much. She even brought a lawyer I'd never met before who just nodded and told me where to initial. 2 months later I came to the shop early like I always did, and the locks were changed. A printed sign on the glass said, "Closed for ownership transfer." My heart dropped. I banged the door, called her number again and again. Nothing. That same afternoon a man came with papers. He told me the shop now legally belonged to Rukiah. My hands shook. I couldn't even speak. She took everything. And she did it with my signature. I didn't go home that night. I just sat across the street from the shop, staring at the door I used to open every morning with so much hope. My legs refused to move. My mind was blank. I kept waiting, thinking maybe it was a nightmare I would wake up from. But it wasn't. The next morning the new sign was already up. Rukiah's Modern Living. All the handmade pieces were gone. The shelves had been stripped bare and replaced with factory-made decorations. The smell of lavender and candle wax was gone. In its place was strong air freshener and loud music that didn't belong. I sat there for hours, numb. I had no home anymore. I'd sold most of my things just to keep the shop running, and I'd been living in the small storeroom behind it. That key no longer worked. That space no longer existed for me. I was locked out, not just from the shop but from the only piece of my mother I still had. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. At first, some people came to ask what happened, offering pitiful looks and soft voices. But within days the whispers began. I heard them. She gave it away, can you believe that? She was always too soft. Trusted people too easily. What did she expect? It's business, not a charity. It stung worse than I imagined. Some of them had once hugged my mother, shared tea with her behind that counter. Now they laughed behind my back, calling me foolish. I could hear the laughter from the cafe next door. I wasn't just grieving my mother anymore. I was grieving my identity. I walked the same street every day but with nowhere to go. My savings were gone. I skipped meals and drank water from gas stations. At night I found a small bench under a closed shop's awning, curled up and cried until my chest hurt. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the shame. It was knowing I had trusted someone who wore my mother's perfume and smiled at her funeral, and she had ripped the ground from beneath me without a second thought. I had nothing left. Nothing, except the aching memory of a woman who told me once, no matter how dark it gets, always trust your hands and your heart. But right now, both felt broken. I had nowhere else to go, so I found myself wandering the streets again. For days I'd watched the shop, Rukaya's modern living as she called it, go through its changes. I couldn't bring myself to face the new store. It felt like a stranger occupying the only home I had left. But that night something pulled me back. Maybe it was because I couldn't accept the idea of it all being gone. Maybe it was because I needed to feel my mother's presence again, even if just for a moment. The street was quieter than usual, and the lights from the new store's sign flickered against the dark sky. I stood outside for a while just staring at the door. Then, without really thinking, I walked to the back of the shop where the small storeroom used to be. The alley was dark and the air was cold, but I didn't care. I had no keys, no access anymore, but I found an old window that had been left unlocked. I slid through it, dust and cobwebs catching in my hair. I hadn't been back here since Mom passed. The room was small, with old boxes stacked high, some filled with fabric and thread, others with old photos and papers. It was a mess, but it was a mess I remembered fondly, the kind of clutter that made a place feel alive. I felt a pang of nostalgia hit me in the chest. As I sifted through old sewing kits and half-finished projects, I came across a drawer in the corner that had been left open. I hadn't noticed it before, and I wasn't even sure if it was still part of the shop's original furniture. Curious, I opened the drawer. Inside I found a small leather-bound book, its edges worn and dusty. It was a guest book, one I recognized immediately, though I hadn't thought about it in years. My mother had always kept it behind the counter for customers to sign. It was full of names, dates, and comments, little memories that people had left over the years. I couldn't help but smile as I flipped through it. Each note was a tiny piece of my mother's legacy, a trace of all the lives she had touched. But then I found it, the note that made my heart stop. It was written in her familiar handwriting, the letters flowing smoothly across the page. The real gift lies with those who believed in me. The words hung in the air around me like a whisper, like she was still here, guiding me. I read it over and over, the meaning sinking in deeper each time. I hadn't seen this before. I hadn't noticed it when I worked beside her all those years. But now it felt like a message. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I felt something stir inside me. A sense of hope, a spark that had been missing for so long. As I sat there in the dim light of the storeroom, the guest book in my hands, something didn't sit right. It wasn't just the note. There were more details hidden between the lines. I turned the pages slowly, my fingers trembling with anticipation. That's when I saw it. Scrawled in the margin of a page in my mother's handwriting were initials. Jer. I froze. My mother had always been private about certain things, but I couldn't recall any JR in her life. I scanned the page further, and under the initials, there was a series of numbers and letters like a code. A47-12. My heart began to race. Was this some kind of secret? Had my mother been hiding something all along, something I didn't know about? I closed the book and held it tightly. A wave of realization washed over me. This was it. This was the key to something more. I didn't understand it, but I knew I had to find out. I had no answers, only this cryptic message. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. I ran my fingers over the initials and the code again, and it hit me, 47-12. Could be a locker number, right? Or maybe a vault. But where? I thought of every place my mother used to visit. Her favorite cafe, the old antique store, the post office. Nothing seemed to fit. Then without thinking, I remembered something my mom used to mention on occasion. An old local bank. She never went there much, but I had seen her go there once or twice when I was younger. I always thought it was for something small like paperwork or personal savings. There was no harm in checking. I dressed quickly and made my way to the bank. It was an old, unassuming place with brass doors and faded signs. I walked up to the counter and hesitated, not sure how to explain why I was there. The teller looked at me curiously, but when I mentioned my mother's name, something changed in her expression. She asked me a few questions about my mom the last time I saw her. I answered them, feeling my heart pound. Finally, the teller looked at me seriously and said, "You're her daughter, right?" When I nodded, she handed me a key and a slip of paper. The number on it was A47-12. "Your mother left instructions," she said softly. "You're the only one who can access it." I took the key, my hands shaking. This was real. My mother had left something for me, something important. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to find out. The key felt heavy in my hand as I walked towards the safety deposit box. My heart was pounding, every step taking me closer to whatever secret my mother had left behind. I had no idea what to expect, but I knew this was something big, something I hadn't been prepared for. I entered the small, private room in the back of the bank, where the air was thick with old wood and metal. The teller handed me a small metal box and I carefully placed it on the table. My fingers were trembling as I slid the key into the lock. The lid creaked open and there inside was everything my mother had left behind. The first thing I saw was a folded letter. It was handwritten in her familiar flowing script, the ink slightly faded but still legible. I took a deep breath before unfolding it, and my mother's words hit me like a wave. Asterisk, my dear. If you're reading this, it means I'm no longer with you. I've spent my life building something that mattered to me, something that could be your legacy if you want it. I didn't build it for anyone else but you. I hope when you find this, you understand what I've done and why I did it. You are my greatest creation, and this shop, this legacy, is yours, not for them, not for anyone else who might have tried to take it from you. Everything I've worked for, everything I've kept from the world is now in your hands. Use it wisely, my love. Mom. Sis. I paused, my chest tight, blinking back tears. The words, "I built this for you, not for them," echoed in my mind. For a moment I felt like my mother was right there with me, speaking to me across time. I looked further into the box and there it was, an old deed to a piece of property. I almost gasped when I saw it. The location was prime now, much more valuable than it had been years ago when my mother bought it. It was worth a small fortune. Alongside the deed were antique jewelry pieces, each one more beautiful than the last. Gold necklaces, diamond-studded rings, and intricate bracelets. I found a note inside the box, with a recent appraisal showing that these pieces had only increased in value over the years. But that wasn't all. A small leather-bound notebook was tucked underneath everything. As I opened it, I realized it was a list of loyal customers, suppliers, and contacts my mother had trusted. These were the people she had worked with over the years, the ones who helped her build her life's work. And now they were a part of mine. The weight of it all sank in. This was her legacy. This was everything I'd lost, and now everything I could reclaim. My mother had planned this, prepared it all for me, and I felt a fire begin to burn within me. I wasn't just a woman struggling to survive. I had the power to rebuild, to make her proud. The weight of everything I'd discovered was both overwhelming and empowering. I had felt like I had lost everything, but now I realized something incredible. My mother had left me a way to rise again. It wasn't just the money or the assets, though they were more than I had ever imagined. It was the message. It was her belief in me, her faith that I could rebuild everything that had been taken from me. I had to fight. For her. For me. I started by getting to work. I hired a lawyer with some of the funds from the jewelry and the property. The deed to the property wasn't just a deed. It was a gold mine. Hidden within it was a clause that granted me the legal right to reclaim the shop if it had been mismanaged. And considering the way my aunt had taken it from me, there was no doubt she had done just that. It didn't take long for the lawyer to work his magic. We filed the paperwork, we gathered evidence, and before I knew it, I had a court date. I kept telling myself that I was just doing what my mother would have done, standing up for what was mine. The day of the court hearing, I walked in with my head held high. My aunt, sitting across from me, looked more nervous than I had ever seen her. Her face, once full of smug confidence, was now pale. She didn't know what to expect. I had a lawyer and I had the truth on my side. I presented everything: the papers, the letter, the list of customers and suppliers. Each piece of evidence weighed heavily in the room. I told them how she had betrayed me, how she had taken my inheritance with lies and manipulation. The community rallied behind me, and people who had once been hesitant to speak out were now supporting me. The neighbors, the loyal customers who had frequented the shop for years, they all came forward, telling the court how my mother had been a pillar in the community. The judge ruled in my favor. The shop was legally mine once again. I had done it. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like a different person. I wasn't just a woman who had been betrayed. I was a woman who had fought for what was rightfully hers and won. But the fight wasn't over. The shop was mine, but it needed to be rebuilt, both physically and emotionally. I took the money from the property sale and used it to hire a contractor to renovate the space. I wanted it to feel fresh, modern, but I also wanted to preserve what my mother had created. I didn't want to erase the soul of the shop, but I needed to bring in something new, something that reflected who I had become. After weeks of hard work, the Guest Book Boutique was born. The walls were now painted in soft pastel shades with clean, modern shelves and displays. There was a new counter at the front, but I made sure to keep the old sign that my mother had painted years ago, weathered but strong. The real magic, however, was in the details. I added a guest book just like my mother's for customers to leave their thoughts and memories. I wanted them to feel connected to the store, to the same warmth that had always been there. The same energy. The same love. I stood behind the counter on opening day, taking in the soft hum of the music, the light from the windows, and the smell of fresh flowers that now filled the air. I felt at peace. My mother's legacy was alive again, and I was ready to make it my own. The Guest Book Boutique wasn't just a store. It was a symbol of strength, resilience, and love. A tribute to the woman who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. The road to rebuilding my life wasn't easy. I had been crushed by betrayal, knocked down by the people I had trusted the most. For a long time it felt like the world had turned its back on me. But in those dark moments when I thought I had lost everything, I found something extraordinary. My mother's wisdom, her belief in me, had saved me. She had always been so much more than a businesswoman. She was a mother, a teacher, a guide. The words she had written in that guest book, the quiet ways she had built her empire, were all part of the legacy she had left me. I realized then that everything she had done wasn't just for the shop. It was for me. It was her way of preparing me for the future, giving me the tools to rise above, to face whatever came my way. Now, with the Guest Book Boutique thriving, I find myself doing something my mother would have been proud of. I help young women who dream of starting their own businesses. They come to me for advice, for guidance, and I give them the wisdom I have learned over the years. I teach them how to protect their dreams, how to build something that isn't just about money, but about creating something meaningful. As I stand behind the counter of my shop, I watch the new customers enter, each one leaving their mark in the guest book. They leave their notes of encouragement, their stories, their memories. Some of them don't even realize it, but they are adding to the story my mother began all those years ago. Each note is a reminder that I am not alone, that I have a community, a family of strangers who have become part of my story. And every day as I turn the pages of that guest book, I am reminded of how far I've come. I see my mother's handwriting, her words, and I smile because I know she is proud of me. She is still here in every note, in every customer, in every small victory. I thought I had lost everything, but in her final gift, my mother gave me a future.